Hello, I'm Chris Ossman, and this is Solutions. Enough complaining, let's fix America. Today I'm going to discuss what's changed in America, one of the biggest fundamental changes in America, and one that has the ability to distract people from the reality of their world. And that is, well, nowadays it's no longer who's to blame, it is who they can blame. And what I mean by that is instead of people being held accountable for their actions or people being blamed for certain situations or certain things that are going on in America, our media, our politicians, they distract you by saying, oh, that person's to blame or this person's to blame or that entity's to blame or this corporation's to blame. No, one of the things that I'd like to point out is that if you look deeply into what is going on in your own personal life, you will see that there are things that are going on that do not coincide with what our politicians, what our corporate leaders, what our banksters are telling us. Mainly, one of the biggest arguments nowadays is as far as who's to blame and who they can blame is you look at the politicians who are either Democrats or Republicans. They keep going back and forth and saying, oh, the Democrats are to blame for the social safety net and the increasing cost of that. And then the Democrats go back and say, oh, the Republicans, well, they don't even say this anymore, but they used to always talk about how the Republicans were all military. You know, it was like maybe not even the Democrats, but in general, that was the vibe that the Republicans were kind of the war hawk party and the Democrats were the dove party. The Democrats were the party of the people and the Republicans were the party of business. Nowadays, that doesn't seem to be the case at all. And basically, all they're doing is going back and blaming both sides in the two-party system for things that they are themselves guilty of. For instance, Democrats used to always talk about like the military, how the military is growing exponentially, or a lot of them did, and they talked about how we shouldn't be at war with all these countries. But nowadays, Democrats are as big a war hawks as Republicans are, and as I stated in my previous video, the one from yesterday, as a matter of fact, the Democrats actually gave Donald Trump $6 billion more than he even requested in his military budget. So now, are the Republicans to blame for our increasing size of the military budget, or are Democrats to blame? Ultimately, they're both to blame. But who they can blame is each other. And the people that don't really broaden their viewpoint, they just look at red or blue, they will buy into the fact that, oh, Democrats are the peaceniks and the Republicans are the warmongers. But if they step back and look at both parties and how they fund all this stuff, they will see that, yes, both parties are warmongers nowadays. Another different thing that you can look at is this resistance movement from the Democrats. They all say they resist Donald Trump, but do they really resist Donald Trump in any other ways other than symbolically? Nancy Pelosi tearing up a State of the Union speech does not really make a substantive change to the policies that Donald Trump passes if she continues to fund the things that Donald Trump seeks to get funded. Now, if she was really in opposition to him because her party controls the House of Representatives, she would hold the purse strings back from Donald Trump. She would not pass any of his budgets, especially for things like any budgets that pertain to ICE, which is, you know, dealing with the immigrants and having the children separated from their families. How come Congress can't seem to defund that? Because it seems like to me the budget comes up, the budget fights come up quite often, and you rarely hear about the Democrats not giving Donald Trump what he's asking for. Then you look at like the Democratic response to the pandemic. They gave a lot of money to corporations. So are they the party of business or are they the party of the people? Because they only gave a small percentage of money to the people relative to what they gave to corporations. It was something like, well, $1,200 in everybody's pocket. So you see that, and then you look at how much that adds up to. And if you take all of America and you give them $1,200, that's about $420 billion. Meanwhile, the corporations have gotten trillions of dollars. $1 trillion is 1,000 billion. So you guys do the math. In the previous video, I talked about the abstraction of $1 trillion, which if you take $1 trillion and you count it out, like at $1 per second, it would take you over 37,000 years to count to a trillion. Whereas if you do the same thing with $1,200, it would take you 20 minutes, I think was the number. If you even do the average amount that 44% of Americans make per year, which was $18,000 before the pandemic, if you count to 18,000, that would only take you 5 hours if you do it at 1 second per dollar. So, how is it that people still refer to the Democratic Party as a party of the people? Because they don't represent anybody's interest. As a matter of fact, as far as blaming someone for having a non-representational government, it's more on the Democrats than the Republicans. Because to me, the Republicans don't hide what they are. They are honest about their treachery and their corruption and their bad policies that basically benefit the wealthy. In America, the only truly represented demographic in this country are the wealthy. They get the tax breaks. They avoid all the laws. Look at Jeffrey Epstein, all the illicit and immoral and illegal stuff he did. Yet and still, he got to roam free almost every time. Even when he was in prison, he got to roam free. Who else in this country gets to roam free while they're incarcerated, while they're serving prison time? And during probation. Look at that Netflix special. It's very eye-opening, even in light of all the crazy stuff that was said about Jeffrey Epstein and exposed about what his misdeeds before, he killed himself, which is another weird thing. Again, I look at like Epstein, and we can look at like who's to blame. And Epstein was to blame for his actions. And we can also look at Bill Clinton was to blame for not knowing that Epstein was a pedophile, because he had the might of the Secret Service behind him. He had the FBI behind him. He had all these agencies that could have and should have protected the president, including the president's reputation. But for some reason, they missed the mark on vetting Jeffrey Epstein, and they could not figure out that this guy was having underage girls on his islands and all these other things. What is the job of the Secret Service? They're supposed to go out there before presidential visits to anywhere, and they're supposed to make sure that the president's safe physically and mentally and emotionally in all ways possible. The president is supposed to be safe, and the Secret Service is supposed to do their utmost to guarantee this safety. But did they do that when taking Jeffrey Epstein? Or is Clinton to blame for knowing what was going on? Maybe he didn't. But I just find it hard to believe that all of the agencies in America, all these authoritarian agencies in America, didn't have the wherewithal to discover that Jeffrey Epstein was a pedophile. Same goes with Donald Trump. He's not the president. He wasn't the president at the time, but he still had the enough money to hire a private investigator to go look at Jeffrey Epstein's island, to go look into Jeffrey Epstein. To me, it seems like if you have wealth in that degree, you shouldn't just trust some other wealthy person, because wealthy people are human. They could kill, they could steal, they could do all kinds of illicit things just like anybody else. So if you want to protect yourself, it seems to me that Donald Trump, as a very rich person, would have sent somebody to figure out what's up with this Jeffrey Epstein guy. I mean, just a Google search. A lot of these people came into Jeffrey Epstein's life after he had served time in Florida for soliciting prostitution. But then if they looked at the case, they could have just easily found out that the guy, or had an investigator look at the case, they could have found out that the guy was actually being accused of being a pedophile. So who's to blame in that case? We know that these authorities who hung out with Jeffrey Epstein, they're to blame. But who does the media blame? They focus on the women. They talk about the women being, these claims. There's why so late? Why so many years late? Why all this other stuff? All this circumstantial evidence, when instead they don't look at the proof. And it's shown that the media hid this stuff. That one reporter who said she had been holding on to information for 3 years, but was threatened to not get access to the royal family if she were to expose this stuff. So there we go. It's not who's to blame. It's who they will blame. And the same goes for what's going on right now, specifically the George Floyd case. Now you're starting to hear about how George Floyd wasn't a good guy. And that always seems to happen in these cases where there's police brutality. They basically focus on the background of the people who are dead. And it's like, it doesn't matter what those people did in their past, unless it was to shoot a cop, unless it was to brutalize a cop, unless it was directly related to what was going on at the time. And in none of those cases have they actually proven that, like Michael Brown, okay, he went and stole some cigars, but is that worthy of being murdered? George Floyd, he passed off a fake $20 bill. Is that worthy of someone being murdered? And then now they're looking into these people's past. They do that all the time. Every time there's a black person who gets brutalized by a cop, they always look at the person who's being brutalized background when it's a black person. And that's really outrageous. And again, it's not who's to blame. It's who they can blame. And in this case, the media starts turning on the victims, and they start blaming the victims for their own murder, which is crazy. Because even whatever these victims have done in these cases where it's videotaped, the victim is not at fault for causing their own death. Now I've seen videos where even FBI agents, because they were black, they're being harassed by police. There's a great one out there with a black guy in a red t-shirt, and he's basically being harassed by the police. And I think he's an FBI agent. All I know is that they handcuff him, they start handling him roughly, and he's not doing anything but sitting there having a drink. And then they start handcuffing him, and then they finally pull out his ID, and they realize that he's an FBI agent. And that is when they take the cuffs off, and then he starts calling them idiots and all this other stuff. So, what would the media do with that? They would probably try to go after the FBI agent and look at his background and say, oh, he's not a good FBI agent, or he did something at a McDonald's, he ate a hamburger for free, or some stupid reason to go after the FBI agent's character as opposed to going after those cops' character. And they always seem to push forward this narrative that the police are always right, this good apples bad apples thing. If there were good apple police, they would arrest the bad apple police. So in my opinion, anywhere you see cases of things like George Floyd, there were 3 good apples supposedly standing around watching this bad apple kill a guy. So if there are so few bad apples, how come the police can't seem to arrest them? They're in the same building. They don't even have to go outside to arrest these people. They could just walk over to the next desk in some cases and arrest these people. But for some reason, all these good apple cops never seem to weed out the bad apple cops. So those are some of the things that I always try to point out. That's what I tried to point out in my book, is what you were being told versus what we see in reality. They do not align. So you can basically look at what you're being told in a lot of these instances and just go with the opposite. It's like, I think King Queens had an episode where the dad, he was giving advice to people, and they just started doing the exact opposite of what he was doing, and their lives improved. And then eventually he found out, and he started telling them the opposite, so their lives actually got worse. But anyway, like I said, it's not who is to blame. It's what you can, or who you can blame. And another instance of that is when you look at things like Occupy Wall Street. I know that prior to Occupy Wall Street, the problems with the economy were being blamed on firefighters, teachers, nurses, and police because they all have unions. And then all of a sudden, when Occupy Wall Street flares up, the police are given, in New York, I think they were given like $5 million to go out and do overtime and all this other stuff to squash those protests. And then what does the media do? They start looking at the protesters and start calling them a bunch of hippies. And they generalize them as hippies, lazy, layabouts, and that's why, they kind of basically gave the impression that that's why those hippies don't have any money. When, in the meantime, the wealthy are still accumulating more wealth. More income is going to fewer and fewer people. But the media pointed out that Yeah, it's these hippies that are the drag on the problem with the economy. Is they're lazy. They live in their basements. Even politicians like Hillary Clinton were talking about people living in their basements. I think it was Hillary Clinton. Anyway, it was one of these prominent politicians that was talking about, yeah, if you're lazy, you live in your basement. Look at Joe Biden now. He's talking about millennials. You know, he doesn't want them. They're going to be lazy and all this other stuff. So millennials don't vote for him. I don't think anybody should vote for either of these two people. I think all independents should go out and vote third party, and whatever third party is the biggest in if they get at least 15% of the vote, then they will be allowed on the debate stage, or they should be allowed on the debate stage according to the rules that these two parties have set up. But we'll see, because they always seem to change the rules. The DNC changed the rules on a whim, just to keep certain people off the debate stage. I think they did that with Tulsi Gabbard in this last election. So what people need to do is to realize that the media is owned by corporations. It's run by very rich people. The news is reported by very rich people. So if they were to report that we need bigger tax breaks for the poor, if they were to do these things and point out who's to blame, they would not only lose their job, but they would be going against their own best interest. Because if you're rich, you're not going to go vote against tax breaks for the rich. You're going to want to vote for tax breaks for the rich, because you are rich. It doesn't even make sense that we have all these people that represent us. Look at the number of wealthy people that are in Congress. There shouldn't be a majority of people in Congress who are supposed to represent the United States that are rich. There should be a breakdown where people have their representation is honest and true. But again, the media doesn't look to blame those who are to blame. They look at who they can blame. Because right now, the rich are responsible for the police brutality that we see around the country. The rich are responsible for wealth inequality. And they're responsible for the fact that our politicians did not handle the pandemic properly and did not give people the money that they needed to quarantine, to self-isolate. It was a pandemic that was affecting the entire globe. And one of the few countries that could respond in a big way did not respond. Most of the other countries around the world responded by helping their citizens. America did not help its citizens with the CARES Act or with the HEROES Act, or with whatever they want to call it. It did not. So ultimately, who's to blame? The wealthy are to blame for a lot of the problems that are going on. Because if you have a system of economy that requires scarcity, it seems to require that most of the money go to the top, then you have a problem. Because when most of the money goes to the top, it becomes worthless for the base, the majority of citizens. And that's not the society that we should have. Thank you. Join me again tomorrow for another Solutions. Enough complaining, let's fix America.